out. There was these terrible machloket in Am Yisrael here in Israel. We had all these hafganot, all these rallies. There was a plan within the government to make some changes within the Supreme Court. I don't think anyone understood all the details of it, by the way. I think there's maybe like 5 people that understand all the details about it. But kind of things really divided down left and right party lines. And it became this tremendous fracture within the Jewish people, within the Israeli society. People were talking about how maybe this could turn into civil war. I never thought it would break down to that level, but for sure it was a very, very difficult, intense time here. And then the war broke out, and it was suddenly like all this negative energy, and every person in each other's throat kind of just dissipated. There's actually some incredible stories where the frameworks that they used in WhatsApp and other civil frameworks to be able to mobilize all the hafganot. So they utilized those to mobilize soldiers and to mobilize help for those who were kicked out of their house, who had to leave their homes, both in the south and the north. And they used all these civil structures in order to mobilize all of us to be able to help one another now. So now one of the things that people experience here, which is really incredible, is all this achdut, all this unity in Am Yisrael. And suddenly we're all united against this common enemy. And as far as I understand, more or less, there's all this political consensus, and everyone really wants to just defeat our enemies, and we're all on the same page. And that really is strengthening. It's wonderful, the stories we hear. It's wonderful to be all on the same page with our brothers and sisters, even though obviously what brought us there is and was incredibly painful, continues to be each and every day. I guess you could say the silver lining of it is a sense of unity that we all feel with one another, which is really heartening. And it really shows us that we are part of one family. I saw this video of Douglas Murray, amazing journalist, very, very outspoken non-Jew for Israel and for the IDF. And he said, when Hamas came on October 7th, they didn't care if they were religious Jews or Reform Jews or Orthodox Jews or ultra-Orthodox Jews. These kind of compartments that we make within the Jewish community are very nice for us, but they don't mean anything to our enemies. We're just Jews and just want to come and kill and maim, God forbid, hurt as many Jews as possible. So we're all one, we're all unified. However, I think a lot of people have been asking the question now. We can kind of see over the horizon. Please, God, it should be very, very, very soon that we're over the horizon. We've defeated our enemy. There are new facts on the ground in Gaza, also in the north with Hezbollah, that when that time comes, it should be very soon, that what's going to be? Are we going to return back to being in each other's throats? We're going to go back to the same kind of, political dichotomy and government friction that we had before? Or are things going to be different? So I think everyone on both sides wants to say, no, after we've gone through this, certainly it will be different. It will be interesting to see what happens when that does happen. Again, please, God, it should be very, very soon. Because it's easy in kind of the moment to say, oh, no, it's not going to go back to it. And then we don't have this kind of ancillary force pushing against us. We tend to kind of break apart again. So it seems like it's kind of binary, right? Either there's one unified vision of Am Yisrael, we're all one family, unified against a common enemy, the overwhelming large percentage of us, or we are very fractious, and we go back to the 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? Find the Jew on the desert island, and he built 2 shuls. And why'd you build 2 shuls? Well, you have to have the shul that I go to and the shul that I don't go to, right? So these silly little jokes that really articulate something about the Jewish people, that we're not lumpers. We really are splitters, one of my friends says. I think that's very, very true. So what I'd like to explore with everyone tonight is the following question. Is it binary? Are there 2 options? Either we're all together, we're all unified, we all share the same perspective, or we're all kind of at each other's throats in different ways. And I'd like to step into our Jewish texts as a way to be able to describe this, or explore this rather, and to see a different model. Now, if we step away from kind of the political for a moment and look into the textual, think about a Mishnah, okay? Think about a piece of Talmud, if anyone's had the pleasure I really mean that. The pleasure to be able to go through a page of Talmud, to read a Mishnah, to be able to really delve into that. Many of them, maybe outside of Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, but many of the Mishnayot have within them different perspectives. They have disparate positions that are codified within the Mishnah itself, a machloket within the Mishnah. So how do we know this is a Jewish text? We see that there's different opinions going on there. And if you start to open the Talmud and see the discussions, so as my first Gemara teacher taught me, he said that the Mishnah is very easy to read. The Mishnah is the Jewish oral tradition as codified about 2,000 years ago. So he said that Mishnayot were very easy to read, but impossible to understand. Why? Because it's all sorts of information crammed into a very, very small text. So what the Talmud does, it kind of unfurls it and unwraps it and allows us to really understand what the teaching is. And really, any exploration into Gemara gets you very quickly into machloket, disparate perspectives. Which pasuk do we use? Which passage do we use to stand up that idea? Where's the source from this? Maybe the source is from another place. I have a different tradition. And the Gemara is this amazing patchwork quilt of all these different discussions that haven't happened over several hundred years, especially the Talmud Bavli that happened both in Israel and in Babylonia. And they're back and forth and they're back and forth. So how does that work? Okay, just to share the model that we set up here at the very beginning. Is this a model that is binary, right? Is it a model that is everyone's together? Or is it, right? Obviously, it's not together. Or do we say this is a model where kind of everyone's at each other's throats? Well, if it's the latter, so then what is the text doing? Why is it so many times in opposition with one another? So on that note, I'd like to open up a text with everybody, a couple texts, share some text with you guys, and see if we can delve into this idea a little bit more and really kind of understand why the sages do what they do, why they're arguing so much. And is this just, like we were saying at the beginning, this political model where everyone's at each other's throats? I'd like to hopefully present another model. But before we do that, let's take a look at this. Now, important text for everybody to look at some point in their life. We'll see a little taste of it tonight. But if you really want to understand the relationship between Torah Shebiktav, the written Torah, and Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, it's one of the great places to understand that relationship is the Rambam's introduction to the Mishnah. Here on Sefaria, I found a whole English translation of it. It's fantastic. The Hebrew is very accessible as well, even though it was not originally written in Hebrew. It was translated. Judeo-Arabic, any Judeo-Arabic scholars out there, welcome to dive into the original. But here is the Hebrew and the English. So the Rambam Maimonides explains this relationship, and he gets to the discussion, the topic of machloket, of disparate opinions within the Mishnah and within the Gemara. And he says as follows: rather the matter of that which they say, from when the students of Shammai and Hillel, who did not serve all that was required of them, multiplied, disagreement grew in Israel, is evident. Okay, so basically from the time of Hillel and Shammai, the two of them themselves, not necessarily their schools, but them themselves and previous, there were not many disagreements. There were small disagreements or different situations where one would do one way and one way another, but more or less, says the Rambam, Hillel and Shammai really saw things on the same plane. However, once the students start to multiply, then we got into some problems and disagreement grew. Okay, I'm just going to read a little bit more here. In that, when two people are of equal intellect, investigation, and knowledge of the fundamentals from which reasons extrapolate, no disagreement will occur in their reasonings in any way. In other words, two people who are open intellectually, smart, they have all the background information, and they're really looking for truth, they're more or less going to come to the same perspective. No disagreements will occur in their reasoning in any way. And if it does occur, it will be minimal, as is only found that Shammai and Hillel disagree about isolated laws. But when the difference of students towards wisdom slackened, kind of like slackers, right? Students were slackers, they slackened. And the reasoning weakened, In comparison to the reasoning of Hillel and Shammai, disagreement occurred among them in the investigation of many things, as the reasoning of each one of them was according to his intellect and what he had in hand of the fundamentals, i.e., not as much. In other words, what we call Yeridot Dorot, the declining of the generations. The students of Hillel and Shammai were not on this level where they would be able to utilize their intellect and come to the same understanding. They were a varying intellect. They weren't as sharp. They didn't have the same fundamentals. They were lacking. And therefore, they came to different understandings, different reasonings, and the whole system from that point onward starts to break down. So, why am I bringing this? If you look at the Rambam's text here, and in other places as well, how does the Rambam look at machloket as conflict in different perspectives in the Jewish tradition? The Rambam will look at it as a breakdown. Okay, we had the ideal, this intellect, this high level that Shammai and Hillel were on, where they were able to intuit and use their minds to be able to come to the same idea, more or less. But then after that, the generations lessened, they were slackers, and they didn't have the same level, and therefore they weren't able to reach the same level of knowledge and intellect as they had before. Okay, so according to the Rambam, machloket, conflict, is a breakdown. It's a bad thing. It's negative. Okay? Now, if just to take that back to our political model, right? When you have two different ways to look at something, and you have two different people that are analyzing it in a different way, they're going to be now butting heads at one another. And that's the way the Rambam understands what's going on when we see machloket in the Gemara as well. Now, this is for the sake of truth. This is obviously, for very high ideals. Nevertheless, when you see machloket in the Gemara, they're bashing heads against one another because they don't have the full picture in front of them, and therefore they only see part of it. They're lacking, and therefore they're not able to see the whole picture. That's not a good thing, says the Rambam, and therefore there's been a breakdown since the time of Hillel and Shammai. That's one way to look at it. However, there's another way to look at it. There's a more holistic way to look at it. I know Yoni's here, so he's going to appreciate this. And don't worry, we will get to Rev Cook. But there's a more holistic way to look at this. And this actually really has a lot of hints of modernity or post-modernity rather to it. It's not the same thing, but I think everyone's going to find this very interesting, this more holistic way to look at the picture. Now here I have a quote from the Maharal, Baragola. Baragola is a very, very interesting book of the Maharal's because it is not just a commentary that he wrote, but it was written in response to a non-Jew who wrote a really scathing pamphlet about the Talmud. For this Christian, he had no problem with the Tanakh, the original Bible, the Jewish Bible, but he did have a problem with the Gemara, the Talmud, many of the stories in there. So he wrote this really scathing pamphlet that he passed out in the Jewish community to try to lessen the weight of the Talmud in the eyes of the Jews in the Jewish community in Prague. And the Maharal wrote a response to that. And his response to that is an amazing book called The Bear Gold. Okay, so the Maharal is going to give us a different perspective on machloket here. Okay, so everybody check this out. Now he's working off a piece of Gemara here, which I'm not going to get into. So there in that Gemara, and it's really a pasuk from Kohelet, a passage from Ekles. Oh, I'm going to mess it up again, Molly. She can type it in if she.
Ecclesiastes, I think.
Ecclesiastes, thank you.
I'm not sure. Okay.
Exactly.
I also know it is Kohelet.
This is why you're here. So anyway, so they're called Ba'alei Osofot. The rabbis are called the gatherers. Why are they called the gatherers? So Maharal explains as follows: meaning that it is impossible for the wisdom of the sages to be unified in one way, and it is impossible for there not to be division amongst them, according to how they are divided in their intellects. So first of all, the Maharal and the Rambam are seeing things from very different perspectives. For the Rambam, there's like one ideal truth that if they were on the proper intellectual level, they would reach. But the Maharal says it does not work that way. There are different perspectives within different people, depending on how they're divided in their intellect. For every matter, I'm going back to the text of the Maharal, for every matter, there cannot be only one aspect for that one thing. For even if the thing is impure, it is impossible for it not to have an aspect of purity in some way. And likewise, if the thing is pure, it is impossible for it not to have an aspect of impurity. Humans are divided in their intellects, and it is impossible for all human intellects to be unified in one way, as we explained. Therefore, each individual receives one aspect according to the share of his intellect. In other words, the Maharal says, when you look at things in the physical world, even something that is tameh, right, something that is impure, there's always a facet to it that's pure. And you look at something that's pure, and there's a facet to it that is impure. And depending on your specific intellect, you're going to connect to and be able to draw out the side of that thing, which is either pure or impure, depending on who you are and your facet of your intellect. None is any way less or more than the other. Just that because you have a unique perspective, therefore you're going to look at and analyze this differently, and therefore you're going to come up with a different conclusion. Okay, so that's a very different perspective than the Rambam. I think it's just incredible that this was written in the 15th century, that the 16th century, the 16th century, that how modern this sounds. You know, really understanding and appreciating that each person has their own perspective. Now, he's not going as far, he's not a postmodernist. Everybody has their own narrative, right? There's no such thing as truth. No, there is a broader framework of truth, according to the Maharal. It's a frame. It's not binary like the Rambam. It's a frame that holds multiple perspectives. But inside that frame are different perspectives, right? Postmodernism was to say, but there's no such thing as a frame, there's no such thing as truth. That's not what the Maharal is saying. He's saying that there's a frame that exists, but there's inside that frame different perspectives. Okay? We can clarify this a little bit afterwards if we need to. Okay, so that's what the Maharal.
Really, really fast question.
Yeah, please.
Have you been saying Rambam or Ramban?
Rambam, Maimonides. He had the.
All right, thank you. Just couldn't hear.
Hakdama the Mishnah. No problem. He was the introduction to the Mishnah, the Rambam, Maimonides. Okay, now we're going to take it one step further with Rav Kook. Talking about peace, right? As we mentioned before, this idea that everyone's unified. When we think about peace, probably the first thing that comes to mind, at least for me, is this idea of shleimut, of wholeness, where everybody's on the same page, kind of like we talked about at the beginning. We're all unified. It's achdut. Rav Kook's going to give us a different perspective. So, first, there's a passage in Yeshayahu, and all your children shall be disciples of the Lord. It's talking about the future, time to come. And great shall be the peace of your children. Let it be soon. Let it be right now. Okay, so again, when we think about peace in this beautiful vision of Isaiah and all around there in those passages, we imagine peace as kind of everyone on the same page. Now, the Gemara is going to give a very unique and interesting, creative approach to this. Probably some of us have heard this before, but if we look at it and think about it, it's kind of radical. Okay, so this appears in the Gemara in Brachot. It appears a couple other places at the very end of different Masechtot, I think 2 or 3 other ones at least. So Rabbi Eliezer says that Rabbi Hanina said, Torah scholars increase peace in the world. As it is said, and all your children, Banayach, shall be taught of the Lord, like the passage said. Banayach, and great shall be the peace of your children. Do not read your children, Banayach, but your builders, Bonayach. What does it mean? Not children, but builders. Okay, interesting. The passage doesn't really seem to be talking about building. Doesn't seem to be talking about scholars. The Gemara takes a kind of an interesting turn here. And it's wanting to utilize this idea of peace being brought to the world through the Torah sages who are building the world. This needs explanation. Okay, this needs a little bit of thought. Now, first of all, before we even look at Rav Kook, I just have to step back for a second and say, wait a second, this is the end of the Gemara in Brachot. We just finished with 64 pages, double-sided, of arguments and discussions, right? We talked about in the beginning about how Mishnah itself, even within the Mishnah, there's machloket, there's different perspectives that are brought down within the Mishnah. All the more so in the Gemara, we've been just sitting through all these rabbis arguing back and forth for pages and pages and pages and pages, and all of a sudden the end says, you know what, these rabbis, they bring peace to the world. They're builders. As we see in Yeshaya, this beautiful vision of peace. Children come into the world where there's no more enemies, everything is peaceful. That's exactly the same as these sages arguing back and forth for the past 64 and a half pages. That's a weird statement. Okay, so it's kind of like two ships passing in the night, like, wait a second, something's missing here. We're not understanding each other. The vision of Shalom that the sages seem to have seems quite different than I understood the passage. And on that note, here comes Rav Kook to explain to us the idea of Shalom in a broader perspective, from a different, more holistic, more organic perspective. Okay, so Rav Kook says as follows. There are those who make the mistake of thinking that world peace will come about when everyone agrees on one opinion. Right? There's a joke that I heard in the name of Rav Shlomo Karlibach, where he's at a concert and he's saying, he's singing up there on stage and he says to everybody, "You want to make world peace?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, world peace." He's like, "Look at the guy next to you and tell him you want to make peace." And then everyone kind of looks over at the other person. They're like, "I want to make peace, but not with that person, right? That person's smelly, or that person's different than me, and that person's too religious or not religious enough," right? So we think that, again, peace means that everybody agrees on one perspective. But Rav Kook says, no, that's not what it means. Then, going back to Rav Kook, then when they see that the more Talmudei Hachamim, Torah scholars, learn, the more opinions are created, they begin to believe these people are causing more conflict rather than creating peace. Like we said, we just got through all these pages of arguing. How can you say these rabbis are building and bringing peace to the world? Rav Kook continues, he says, but in truth, in order to increase peace, all the different views and options must be articulated. It must be explained how each option has its own unique role and function. While on the surface they may seem to contradict one another, when each side's wisdom is truly and deeply expressed, we realize that only by combining different opinions can the light of truth, righteousness, and wisdom of God be truly conveyed. In other words, there needs to be unique perspectives brought and combined together. That's what brings about the light of truth, righteousness, wisdom, truth of God. This is very much along the lines of the Maharal, where if we have to understand that there is a broad frame of truth, and each person, each sage, brings to the surface, through their unique opinion, their fragment of the light of truth, of righteousness and wisdom. And together, these united perspectives bring together what Rav Kook calls the wisdom of God. The total perspective of it is called the wisdom of God, not one or the other, even though these things are in opposition to one another. Let's read a little more. Talmudei Hachamim increase peace in the world. The explanation is as follows. The very fact that they explain, clarify, and give birth to new ideas of Torah from different perspectives is what creates peace. Okay? Peace is not created by one perspective that everybody shares, but it's created by the fact that there's giving birth to new ideas, different perspectives. That's what peace is. As is written, all of your children are students of God. Everyone will eventually understand that even the seemingly contradictory opinions are students of God. These two are arguing with one another. There's only one way to read the pasuk. It's either like Reish Lakish or Rabbi Yochanan. But together, even though these two are opposing, they both stand in the same framework and become students of God. Going back to Rav Kook, each opinion uncovers a different truth of God. Do not read the world as your children, but instead your builders. Just as a house is built from different parts, so too is truth built from the combination of different perspectives and ideas. These and those are the words of the living God. Why they're called builders? Because each one brings a unique perspective that builds together, as opposed to building a building of bricks where all of them are the same. If you can imagine a stone building where each one builds with a uniquely hewn shaped stone, right? In England, I know they have homes that are built on this in a very beautiful way, where all the stones are put together and each house is unique and different. That's the vision of being bonim, and that's the vision of peace, where all these different perspectives, all these different stones come together to create the house, which is the words of the living God. One last point here. Indeed, each unique method of education has its own role and function. Thus, it is wrong to abandon or throw away any idea or viewpoint. One must invest energy into each side and try to understand its role. And when two opinions are found to be in contradiction, it is precisely through this clash that wisdom is created. This is very, very powerful and really brings us back to the beginning of the discussion. When I sit with someone and we look at whatever we're looking at, and we totally disagree with one another, so we can argue and fight and belittle the other person, play identity politics, right? This is something that I see all the time on YouTube. It's just, and public discourse. When I don't like what the other person's saying, so I start to attack the person. If you go through the Talmud, through these pages and pages and arguments, almost never do they attack one another personally. It does happen from time to time. Sometimes they call each other's names. It's funny, adds a little humor, adds a little excitement, but rarely there's always kavod Torah. And there's appreciation that they're in this together, what's called Milchama Shel Torah, the war of Torah. They're fighting. They're battling against one another, but they're doing it for the sake of truth. And they're appreciating and understanding that through the way that they're engaging with each other and trying to understand the other's opinion and arguing against the other, they're really creating Torah. That's building Torah, building and hewing out these unique stones through their arguments with someone who doesn't agree with them. And this clash is what creates wisdom. So just to go back to the very beginning, we offered two possibilities. We said, well, maybe there's a binary way to look at machloket, right? Either we are all together, we're all in together, or we're all apart at each other's throats. That is a small-minded perspective I would offer. And I would offer here, according to the Maharal of Kook, there is something much bigger and I think much more exciting and much more accessible that we can step into that can allow for appreciation of others and really to come to a deeper understanding and a deeper truth than we would have before. And that really is the model of the Maharal that I and Rav Kook even articulated even further, that when I sit down and I argue in class with you, through our discussion, number one, I clarify my points. Number two, I hear your points. Number three, together, we build something unique, like stones building a beautiful home together that would not have been built otherwise.